The title of today's lesson is Social Insects, Bees and Wasps. In Lesson 1, we talked about the words social and solitary. Take a minute to think about what those words mean. Solitary describes an insect that lives alone or in pairs. Social describes insects that live in large groups. Social insects must work together in order to survive. Bees and wasps are social insects. Today we are going to learn about the habits of the honeybee and the paper wasp. Both of these are very important social insects. Honeybees live in hives. They help pollinate flowers. They can collect flower nectar, and they produce honey. Paper wasps live in nests, and they also help pollinate flowers. Let's go over some of our vocabulary words before we start our story. Cooperate. Cooperate means to work together for the good of everyone involved. For example, my family and I all cooperate with each other to prepare our evening meal. In our classes, we often have to cooperate with other students to accomplish something. Think about a time when you had to cooperate with students in your class. Colonies. A colony is a community of animals living close together, often sharing a shelter. An example of this would be the beehive. Drones. Drones are the male bees in social bee colonies whose job it is to fertilize the queen's eggs. Pollen. Pollen is a powder produced by flowers that must be transported from flower to flower in order for new flower seeds to grow. Many fruit trees depend on the honeybee to transport pollen to it so that it will be able to produce fruit. Buzz, buzz. Oh, you startled me. I am so busy that I nearly forgot where I was. I'm a honeybee, and I am delighted to be here to tell you a little bit about my everyday world. Honeybees are quite social. Humans are social too, which means that they live together in communities or groups instead of living alone. Social insects live in communities too. Most insects are solitary, living alone their entire lives. They are alone when they hatch from their eggs, they search for food alone, and they find their own shelter. There are thousands of different kinds of bees on the planet, and most of them live solitary lives. But honeybees are different. We live together in organized communities and depend upon one another to live, solving problems as a team. We gather and share food, build nests together, cooperate to raise our young, and help protect one another from enemies. Honeybee communities are called colonies. Our colonies are made up of 20,000 or more bees. We like to make our nests or beehives in dark places. That's why you often see pictures of us buzzing around in the trunks of hollow trees. People use beehive boxes to raise honeybees for honey. Perhaps you've seen these boxes in a field, orchard, or backyard. Wherever we nest, we build honeycombs. This amazing structure of layered cells is made from a waxy substance that we produce in our abdomens. Can you spot a pattern among the cells in this honeycomb? The pattern is that they are all six-sided. Do you remember what we call a shape that has 6 sides? That shape is called a hexagon. What purpose do all of these cells serve? These cells are very important to our lives. Listen carefully and I'll tell you how they are important to the many jobs that we perform. Remember, I told you we are very social insects and very busy. There is lots of work to be done, and each bee in the colony has its own job to do. Every honeybee colony has a mother called the queen bee. The queen is always the largest bee in the hive, and she has only one job to do. She must lay eggs, lots and lots of eggs. She must produce more queens for other hives and make sure there are enough worker bees to do the work in her own hive. The queen bee flies from the nest to mate with male bees called drones. Once the drone has mated with the queen bee, it has done its job and it dies. Drones cannot sting because they do not have stingers. When the queen returns, she lays her eggs, sometimes more than 1,000 eggs a day. The queen lays all of these eggs in her hive. She will return to the comb to lay them in the cells. The queen then pushes tiny eggs, no bigger than a pinhead, from her abdomen into the waxy cells of the honeycomb, one egg to each cell. Remember, the abdomen is the part of an insect's body that is furthest away from the head. In just a few days, the eggs hatch. The larvae get fed pollen by one of the hive's female worker bees. The larvae grow and eventually spin silky cocoons. Worker bees quickly seal over the small waxy cells of the honeycomb, protecting the developing pupa inside each cocoon. Does this process sound familiar? It should. The bees are undergoing a change. In our last lesson, we heard a word that means the changes an insect goes through during its life cycle. Remind me what that word was? That word was metamorphosis. When they emerge from their cocoons, they will chew their way out of the cells, emerging as fully grown adults. Do you think honeybees undergo a complete or incomplete metamorphosis? The metamorphosis of a honeybee is complete. It is a total change. Most of the new adults are female worker bees. They only live for a few months, and they spend their whole lives working hard to keep the hive running well. They keep the hive clean. They serve as nurse bees, tending to the larvae. They make new cells and repair old ones. And they store nectar and pollen that the others bring back to the hive. After several weeks working inside the hive, these hardworking females go outside to serve as guards, protecting the hive from enemies and from bees from other hives. Each hive has its own special chemical scent or smell, so it's easy for them to tell who doesn't belong in the hive. Female worker bees have a lot of jobs that keep them very busy. Near the end of her life, a worker bee becomes a forager bee, collecting a sweet juice from flowers. A forager is an animal that wanders over an area in search of food. This juice, or nectar, is used to make honey. Foraging worker bees have keen or sharp senses of smell and sight and very good memories. They may visit thousands of flowers each day to find the best nectar. When a bee discovers a particularly good source of nectar, it returns to the hive to share its information with other foragers. First, it lets the other foragers smell the pollen so they can identify the type of flower. Then it performs a complicated and special waggle dance. As it circles about in a pattern like a figure 8, it wags its abdomen as it moves through the middle of its dance. The bee's repeated movements, circling and waggling its abdomen, tell the others exactly how far away and in which direction from the sun the flowers are located. A bee that thinks she has found a really good flower patch does the waggle dance with lots of energy. Why do you think it might be helpful for the other bees to know how good the source of the nectar is? Where do you suppose the bees put the nectar when they return to the hive? They make the nectar into honey and store it in honey cells, the cells that are not being used for developing bees. The The honey is an important food source for the bees. Think about what jobs the forager honeybees have. While moving from flower to flower, worker bees rub up against a yellow powder called pollen. Honeybees will pack the pollen into baskets of hairs on their hind legs, and then they carry it with them. Pollen is used to feed the larvae, but this pollen is important stuff for another reason. Plants need pollen from other plants in order to make new seeds. This is called pollination. Honeybees are important because they carry the pollen between flowers of the same species or kind. I'd like to introduce you to a relative of mine. This is a paper wasp. Look closely at its body next to mine. What do we have in common? We each have a head, we each have a thorax with 6 legs, an abdomen, an exoskeleton, and wings. And this particular wasp, the paper wasp, is a social insect, just like me. Some wasps are solitary, but the black and gold ones nearly always live in societies or groups. Like honeybees, wasps live in large groups. What do you think these groups are called? Yes, wasps live in colonies. Each colony has a leader, a female wasp who is bigger than all of the other wasps, and who spends most of her time laying eggs. Sound familiar? What do you think she's called then? She is called the queen. Like honeybees, wasps build nests. They build them in many different places, usually in hidden, difficult to see places that are protected from rain and bad weather, such as the under eaves of houses or in protected areas on trees. The eave of a house is a protected place where the roof and the outside wall come together. A lot of wasps like to build their nests there. Wasp nests have a very different look from beehives on the outside, but their paper-like structures are similar to ours on the inside. We'll take a look at how paper wasps build their nests. The process begins with the queen. She finds plant fibers, dry grasses, old boards, fence posts, and pulls them apart with her strong jaws. She softens the splintery pieces with saliva inside her mouth and chews them into a paste that looks and feels a little like paper. Then she sticks a dab of this paste to whatever surface she has chosen for her nest. The queen adds a tough stem to support the whole nest and begins attaching cone-like chambers to it. These clusters of 6-sided chambers open downward to keep the rain out. As the queen forms each chamber, she deposits an egg into each one. The eggs develop into larvae. The queen wasp takes care of the first larvae herself. She leaves the nest to find food, capturing and chewing other insects into mush to feed her young. About 2 weeks after hatching, the larvae enter the pupa stage, spinning cocoons inside each cell and covering the cells with silk. These sealed cells break open a few weeks later, and out come adult wasps with long legs, strong wings, and large eyes. Most of these newly hatched wasps are female workers who begin to take over the queen's work right away. They hunt for food and feed the larvae, clean and repair the cells, and guard the nest. Others fan the nest with beating wings, and some even spread water over the combs to keep the nests cool. While the workers enlarge the nest for more and more wasps, the queen goes back to laying eggs. By summer's end, many of the workers have died. There are often 250 or more cells inside the wasp's papery nest. The wasps that do emerge at the end of summer are no longer female worker wasps. Instead, they are new queens and males. The new queens find shelter in protected places, in attic walls, inside logs, under bushes, where they will hibernate all winter. When spring comes, the new queens come out from hiding and begin building nests for new colonies of wasps. All wasps abandon their nests in fall, using them for one season only. When fall comes and leaves drop from the trees, look up and see if you can spot one of their papery apartment houses dangling from under a roof or partially hidden behind a wall. Next time, you'll find out how some other social insects build their nests. Until then, be thinking about who they might be. In the read aloud today, you heard, "She returns to the comb to lay the eggs in the cells." Here, comb means a group of waxed cells, each of which has 6 sides, that is built by honeybees or wasps. Comb has a lot of other meanings too. One meaning for the word comb is a flat piece of plastic or metal with a row of thin teeth that is used for brushing hair and making it look neat. Comb can also mean the soft part on top of the head of some birds, like the rooster in this picture. All right, my friends, I've got some questions about our insects that we learned about today, the honeybee and the wasp. Today we learned that both of those insects, both the honeybee and the wasp, have a larva stage and a pupa stage. If they have both a larva and a pupa stage, do they go through a complete metamorphosis or an incomplete metamorphosis? They go through a complete metamorphosis. Remember, a complete metamorphosis starts with an egg, then moves to larva, to pupa, to adult. But an incomplete metamorphosis goes from egg to nymph to adult. All right, my friends, I am going to show you this very big picture. In this picture, we can see a queen bee surrounded by other bees. The queen bee has a very important job that keeps the life cycle of the bees going. What is her very important job? What does she do? Put that picture up. The queen bee, her most important job is to lay eggs. She lays eggs to create more bees for the colony. Let me show you this one. Here I've got pictures of bees that are not the queen bee. Bees that are not the queen bee also have important jobs within the colony, different things that they do to help keep the colony working together. Remember, bees are social insects, so they help each other and work together as a community. What other jobs do bees have in a colony? See if you can think of a couple different jobs that other bees have. We know there are drone bees that mate with the queen, worker bees that build the honeycombs. Worker bees also protect the larvae, store nectar and the pollen, and guard the hive. And then we have the forager bees that go out and collect nectar for the hive. All right, we're gonna do another picture. There we go. We learned that bees do a special dance. They call it the wiggle dance. Why do they do this special dance? Why do bees do the wiggle dance? The wiggle dance is part of how bees communicate with each other. Again, bees are social insects, so they work together, but they can't talk to each other like we do when we work together on homework or on different projects. Because they can't talk together with words like we do, they have to communicate through different ways. One way that bees communicate is through this wiggle dance. They use that dance to show other bees, other forager bees, where the sweetest nectar is located. All right, friends, one last picture. This is a picture of a paper wasp hive. Why do you think these insects are called paper wasps? Or why is it called a paper wasp hive? Their hive looks like paper. It's not actually made of paper. Remember, they chew things up and spit it out to create this hive. But it does look like it is made completely out of paper. That's why we call these wasps paper wasps, is the hives that they create look like paper. All right, my friends, I want you to turn to whoever is helping you today, and I want you to tell them who you think the most important bee in a colony is. Who has the most important job? Is it the foragers, the drones, the worker bees, or the queen bee? Tell them why. Make sure you have good reasons to explain why you think that insect is the most important to the survival of the beehive, the bee colony. All right, my friends, as you're wrapping that conversation up with whoever's helping you today, I'm going to move over to my computer so I can show you what to do on today's assignment. When you're done with your conversation, go ahead and open up the PDF that is attached to this assignment. All right, my friends, in today's journal entry, we are going to be talking about the social insects that we learned about today. Your first job, we talked about two different social insects, honeybees and paper wasps. Your first job is to decide which of those two insects you would like to talk about today in your journal. When you have decided, we'll start with our writing section. You've got 2 pages. You don't have to use them both if you can fit them all on one, but that extra page is there if you need it. I want you to give me 3 to 5 sentences, so at least 3, but up to 5. If you need a couple more, that's okay too. 3 to 5 sentences that explain why the wasp or the ant, whichever one you chose, is a social insect. How do you know that they could be classified as social? Think about the differences between social and solitary insects. Remember, social insects live in communities where each of them have specific jobs to help keep the community running smoothly. Whereas solitary insects live alone or with one other insect, and they do everything on their own. Explain to me why a honeybee is a social insect, or why a paper wasp is a social insect. Give me at least 3 facts that let you know why that is true. When you are done, make sure those sentences, as you're writing them, are complete. Make sure they are complete sentences and that they make sense. A complete sentence has a subject that the sentence is about, a verb that explains what that subject is doing, and an ending, so it all makes sense. It's helpful when you're writing sentences to read them aloud. When you read them aloud, it helps you know if they're complete. When they are incomplete, they don't sound finished, they'll sound funny. So you might want to read them aloud as you're writing them, and that might help you make sure they're complete. When you are finished with your writing, you'll come back up to our box at the top and draw a picture of the whichever insect you chose. I also want you in this box to label your explanation of why it's a social insect and your drawing. I want you to tell me which insect you chose. So if you chose the paper wasp, either at the top or the bottom of our box here, I want you to label it. Tell me which insect you are drawing and talking about, and then give me at least 3 sentences that explain why that insect is a social insect. When you are done with that, friends, go ahead and turn it in, and you are all finished with knowledge today.